Good evening and Happy New Year, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Asad Lalji. Welcome to our first live session of Avid Online for 2021. And for those who are joining us for the first time, a special welcome to you. Please refer to the chat box for information on Avid Learning and the work that we do. This year holds such promise with the new vaccine on the horizon. Cultural shifts that began last year have now come to fruition with so many more innovations, inspirations, and perspectives to be made and discovered. At Avid Learning, we use the extraordinary circumstances of 2020 brought upon us to innovate and transition our programming online seamlessly and inventively for our audiences. So, whether we continue online or transition to physical events or a hybrid mix of both, we stay true to our mantra, as always, that learning never stops. This brings me to our evening session. Avid Learning presents documentary filmmaking, a fascinating live session led by filmmakers Esha Paul and Naman Saraiya. For more about them, please refer to their bios that have been posted in the chat section. In this session, these two former producers at Vice India will take participants through the fundamentals and basics of documentary filmmaking, from the stages of pre production to post production, and highlight the various creative and conceptual processes involved and stylistic techniques employed by leading filmmakers in the genre. Please note that this session will be 75 minutes, followed by a 15-minute Q&A in which Isha and Naman will be taking questions. So please keep them ready. Start posting them in the Q&A box throughout. On that note, thank you once again for tuning in. Over to you, Naman and Isha, and look forward to a fascinating session. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Asad. And I'm going to take this minute to be expressing my shock at 68 people who were tuned in on a Saturday evening when they could have been doing anything else, including watching some documentaries. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I'm going to let Esha introduce herself first, and then we'll take on from there. Yeah.
Hi, thanks, Asad. Short introduction from me. So I started making documentaries about a decade ago. It all started when I did my master's in journalism and specialized in documentary filmmaking. And as a journalist, I used to work in a freelance role with Vice. And through years, started off generally as a thing I just wanted to faff around with going to people and talking to them, being in their drawing rooms. And now I cover caste politics, identity politics, generally crime and sexuality, now for Vice.
All right. And I think a little bit about myself is that, well, I did not think I'd end up in documentaries. When I was younger, I always wanted to be a writer. When I tried becoming a writer, I realized I want to be a photographer. When I realized that, I figured, well, if I'm making still images, might as well do moving images. And one thing led to another. And I guess a sense of disregard for the larger industry of mainstream filmmaking led me to nonfiction, and that's how I ended up, I guess, culminating all my interests towards alternative culture, real ground stories, and I guess everyday things that people are fascinated by, and putting a camera to them. And I guess that's how I ended up becoming a documentary filmmaker, if we can call ourselves that, I guess. Asad was a little too kind in his introduction. So we take that, I guess, for now. I think we can start I don't know if you guys can see the presentation. Yeah, so I made a little presentation, if that helps. You guys, more than that, I think it's going to be easier for us to not ramble on for 75 minutes, which kind of sounds daunting when you put you sort of number to the minutes that we have to keep rambling on to you guys about. What we're going to try to do through the session is take you through the entire process of what it takes to make, whether it's a 5-minute piece or it's a 500-minute piece. Also, before we get into the nitty-gritties and depths of it, we're going to talk a little bit about just documentaries as a, I guess, format, as a medium of expression, as I mean, one of the many things that it can be, uh, possibly and hopefully not in an academic way like it was perhaps taught to a lot of us in film school or journalism class or wherever else it might have been. Um, so yeah, we can move to the next bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to let Esha lead on this and then come in.
I mean, Naman's given you a lowdown of what to expect coming on. But to start off, let's define what we mean by documentary filmmaking a little bit. I mean, it's a vague word now, especially in the digital age that we are in, that allows filmmakers like Naman and me to exist as well. Uh, a lot more people are making videos uh, than they were earlier. And documentary filmmaking itself, the word and what it means has changed, possibly in each decade that we're past because of the technology that we're sort of living in. Um, to start off, basically, documentary filmmaking is nonfiction content. So, nonfiction is stuff that happens in real life. And once my professor told me that it's basically throwing colors in the air and hoping they all land onto a canvas and make a painting out of it. It's a bit like that. Filmmaking itself, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, usually has arcs, and so do docus. On a micro level, when you see a film, it has segments to it. The story moves on with a start, middle, and an end. And now that a lot more of you might be watching stuff on Netflix, series like Tiger King or other docus, you might see that they themselves have an arc to them. Each episode considers a story moving forward. So that's what actually becomes documentary filmmaking for us when we're talking about it in the presentation today. And mostly the difference, perhaps, between fiction and non-fiction becomes the fact that along with the art, we also are telling a sort of a truth. A sort of a truth, because there's nothing that is objective, it is a subjective truth. But along with that truth comes a responsibility, and you'll hear a lot more about it when we're talking about research. But the fact that you have dry facts and you have to somehow make them interesting enough as a story to be told to someone, that's the tricky part. And Naman, is that what we're doing today?
Yeah, possibly.
Pretty much.
Talking about the objectivity and subjectivity bits, I guess there's no better place for living proof of that than Indian YouTube comments. So I guess if you need a masterclass on objectivity and subjectivity, just
Yeah.
go onto any political piece made by anyone, not just us,
Yeah.
onto YouTube, and I guess objectivity and subjectivity kind of becomes really clear right there. One of the important things, just to add on to what Esha said, I guess even a decade and a half, maybe 2 decades ago, when I was introduced to documentary filmmaking, the idea of documentaries was so different than what it is now, right? It earlier meant like boring frames and just it was the definition of something that your parents would watch on DD. Whereas now everyone just seems to want to watch only nonfiction documentary content on Netflix, thanks to, I guess, so many great strides that have been made in the art form. The fact that documentary cinema or filmmaking could be stylized, could be used as a tool for change, could be used as an aspect of cinema that sort of inculcates change or can inspire many people. There's been great examples of this over the years, whether it's through investigative, through digging in and just following a subject over a long period of time, or something that's just truly wonderful and bizarre and that someone had access to and perhaps wanted to present to people. Your idea eventually is what needs to come through in your film, in the way that if something is supremely interesting to you, I guess the job of the film then is to make sure that it translates to that many more people and remains interesting to everyone else as well. Um, Having said that, um, sometimes I wonder if there is even a point to being a documentary filmmaker because everyone has a mobile phone and everyone's going live on Instagram all the time, and documenting what they're seeing without having subjective any kind of objectivity to it. So I guess self-doubt is another aspect that I wouldn't mind covering to make it a bit more morose towards the end of it, and perhaps
Hello, Naman
questioning
cynicism.
what is the larger aim of documentary filmmaking as well. So I think we can move to the next.
Yep. Yep. Uh, Pretty
Yeah.
much. Yeah. Okay. Let's start with just talking about head and heart. Basically, in short, filmmaking, especially documentary filmmaking, it's art, but it's also a science because apart from all the imagination that there is, and especially nowadays, a lot of people who are working in the fiction realm have started coming into the docu realm as well, Duplass Brothers, for example. And you can see that a lot of the way that we're seeing documentary films are changing. The narratives are kind of becoming a lot more fictionalized, a lot more stylized. It's also early days for that, but you need a lot of imagination to also carry those styles out. Um, I would say that maybe a stronger part of what you need to do, or at least for us, was that the more you know, you get better at it. Watching a lot more of other filmmakers' works have inspired me personally, and it's all like, and also like talking to your grandmother or your father or people on the street. Everything kind of from Naman meeting a rickshawala who really loves a certain kind of music to stories where we've gone to shoot another story but another one has come out. It's just ever evolving, and especially the form itself. We can move on to the next one. So in the next slide we'll talk about basically who all make a docu, basically the crew.
All right. I guess this is something everyone I've worked with will sort of perhaps hate me for and watch for, that sometimes the smaller the crew, the better the story. But I think the most important thing before I go into the depths and details of what perhaps you need to make a documentary film happen is knowing what your film is and what your subject is before deciding on your crew. That said, there are a few elements to your crew which are so important and you cannot do without. In a traditional sense, if you're making a big budget film, you can have 100 people on your payroll if you have that kind of budget to make a documentary in the first place, which I believe nowadays everyone is kind of being granted thanks to the flooding in of OTT platforms and the kind of nonfiction content that everyone seems to be watching. That said, there's a few things on ground that are absolutely essential. And I cannot stress this enough. The most important person, according to me, on ground is your sound guy. Because if you don't have whatever is being said recorded, your film is as good as nothing. Having said that, there's all sorts of roles that exist, like a director of photography, a scriptwriter, associate producer, assistant director, sound recording, music director, edit. There's all sorts of people, right? There are a few ways to go about doing this. One is you take a traditional sort of setup where there's like 20, 30, 40, maybe more people on ground with you. However, when you want to go in to places where the area is sensitive, the story is sensitive, the smaller the crew, the better. And what happens, and perhaps Esha and I have done this way too many times, where literally we are camera, director, sound, and producer at the same time, and maybe there's one more person who doubles up as three other things as well. And sometimes the kind of stories that you get when it's just two people or three people sort of being let into someone's life and story can rarely ever be replicated with like 100 people, but that's just our opinion, I guess. What's very important um, to know is the kind of access you're getting to your subjects that you're perhaps going to be making a film with, or they're letting into their story, and how comfortable they will be with the number of people that are around. But knowing your crew is very important. To give you an example, I think, well, it's not even been a year. It feels like it's been a long time. But about a year ago, we went in to do a little profile of Omar Khalid, the CA protest in Shahid Bagh. The idea was to explore Shahid Bagh, but as told from the perspective of someone who grew up in the neighborhood, which was Omar Khalid. And there was no way I could have taken a film crew there to make that film. So we were literally three people. Constantly following, constantly listening to what he's saying, constantly rolling, because there were so many great moments while just walking on the street with someone like that that you do not want to miss out on. And if we were there with 20 people, there was never it was never going to happen that we'd get the same kind of reactions, footage, sound bites, interactions, and moments that we did get with just three people being on ground. Um, Before I run way further into this conversation, I'm going to move to ask Swani to move to the next slide so that Esha can talk to you a little bit about getting to that stage, which requires you to pitch first.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's pitch to publish. So first step is pitch. But pitching itself doesn't come right out of the like clouds. You sort of have to know a little bit basically about the kind of story that you're approaching and who is in the story and who the story is for. So, for example, if you're pitching to a larger network or an OTT platform, the pitch would be much more detailed. A pitch would be much more visual. But if you're doing it perhaps for a news organization, the pitch would rely much more on access and the turnaround time and being in the center of action. So when you're writing a pitch, ideally, the main things that you need to tell is what is the story? This little image here will tell you how to kind of weave that in. Make sure that everything you have that seems to be important is somewhere crammed into your pitch, but not overwhelmingly so. So do know who your main characters are. The main characters being, it's always a good idea to have one lead characters or two lead characters who take you through the stories, and everyone else can kind of become accessory characters. And it is important to know at the pitch stage who the main ones are and who the accessory ones are and how you're tying them together, moving from one place to another place. um, and your pitch kind of becomes like a template for you to go forward. And let's say if your pitch is approved at a later stage, then you would need to kind of tell people, let's say you're meeting person XYZ, then what kind of location you're meeting them in, what kind of action you're capturing. All of that needs to be sort of signaled, forewarned in a pitch, but can be detailed on later. An idea is one page. If you can put your story into one page in details, that's great. Starting with one line, that is your log line. And that log line becomes the way. I'll let Naman actually tell you more about what to have in a log line or not. But this becomes a template not just for the people you're presenting it to, but also for yourself, because sometimes when you start on this journey of trying to make a video, a lot more information starts coming in when the research starts happening, when you start meeting more people. Everything can seem interesting, but the idea is to stick to what you started with. And yeah, that little gif is because Vice is usually made fun of for doing this little minority and like poor countries, like sex and crime. But the idea is that there is little point in telling a story that already has been told many times. And the smaller, the more niche the story, the rarer the access, the better the pitch.
Yeah, to come to the log line, I guess my ex-boss will be laughing her head off right now if she's hearing this, but I've truly understood the importance of the log line as of last week. I'd like to give you a little anecdote about this. I was in Dehradun at my in-laws' place, and my father-in-law was scrolling through Netflix, and as a 60-year-old army retired man, he just skipped past everything that he did not want to read two lines about and did not interest him. So I guess there is no better example to talk about than the logline than someone who that person should be your ideal audience, someone who would not be interested but reads that line and is like, yes, I want to watch this. Um, Talking about the importance of the logline, I think what Esha said holds true is that you need to write that one line and understanding what your story is within that one line more than anyone else, because it helps you get clarity on what you're trying to say with your film. Um, there'll be 100 things about your story or your character or your location where you're filming that seem interesting to you, but to condense it to that one line um, is not just important to you before going into shoot, but also going into edit at a later stage, because you could have gone on ground and expecting to film something that you thought was interesting, while you may have gotten that on ground, but you come back and you realize that your story is completely different from what you had written, and that helps you sort of build on at a later stage during the edit. Um, One sentence sounds difficult, is difficult, and I'm not going to take away from that. It may require 100 one sentences written, rewritten constantly, but knowing that one line um, and condensing your story into that is most important. Then you can go into like further details. Okay, can you sell your story in 50 words? Can you tell in 100 words? This comes on when you start trying to pitch your films to international festivals or grants, which there are thousands of sort of nowadays, and trying to get funding for them. But the most important is that log line, which I guess helps you build everything from. Yeah, and we can move on to the next slide.
Yep. The next slide is about figuring out what is a story that you might be able to at least get a lot more people on board and perhaps sell it to someone. If not sell, at least sell it to your friends so that they come on as free crew for you. But basically, the pitch becomes the beginning. And okay, so my job at Vice is sort of now I sort of look at pitches that come in from South Asia and Asia for certain stories. And the main things that I'm looking for is, of course, that one log line, but I'm also looking for a story that perhaps is being told, in a different way. And there are many types of stories. One we call like Wake Up the Dead story. So like Asif Kapadia films where you're kind of working with like found footage, or you're working with, yeah, like old archival and you're weaving that in. Ken Burns, for example. The other ones are like rising ones, perhaps like the Bhim Army one. This film was shot in 2015, and this was way before Chandrasekhar Azad became big. And we didn't even know the importance of Chandrasekhar Azad at that point. We were a two-people crew. Two people being one the reporter, and me as the director, sound person, camera person, and the field producer as well. I shot half the film on my iPhone, and so footage is terrible, but it was the first film made on him, so that counts for something. So that basically apart from like rising stories, like people you don't know might become big, but you personally feel might become somewhat of a narrative carrier, become one kind of stories. Another one that I look for is perhaps really personal ones. One Child Nation is a great example of that. A person who went back to China as a single daughter and tries to look for why she doesn't have other siblings, to know the darker truth behind how her family themselves took part in basically China's one child policy. Or films in which the filmmaker themselves sometimes become a character because of the great trauma or a great story that they have become a part of. Also, of course, the larger ones and the ones which become points of passion become the silent ones. Naman's story on Kashmir, and how the lock basically how August 5th had affected the mental health of mothers who had been locked in, and he'll tell you more about it. Those are the kind of stories that were unheard of in the mainstream media, and we wanted to hear more about that. So that obviously is an easy pick. Um, Apart from that, the range of stories that could be the hip hop guys from Bombay to old 1980s gangsters, like in for say Ferrari. All of them, basically what you're looking for is emotional archaeology, or the unknown. Emotional archaeology being kind of looking for emotions that have been lost till now. Naman, do you want to talk about your stories?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about, I guess, the bottom left picture, which is literally almost all of Bombay's hip hop
Mhm.
scene and rappers present on a terrace in, well, almost 2 years ago now. This was right at the
No, definitely 3 years ago. Four, 3.5, 4 years ago. Yeah. Before Gully
well,
Boy, basically.
before Gully
Yeah.
Boy released. We made a little film, um, which I was in some way very convinced about, and it kind of took a lot of back and forth internally advice where we were like, is this the film we want to make, and sort of like launch with this film is called Kya Bolta Banta, and it was tracing the journey of Mumbai hip hop from its early roots till, I guess, Gully Boy coming along and making it as mainstream as you can get. I mean, Excel film directed by the actor Ranveer Singh acting in it. I don't think it can get more mainstream than that. So the idea with the story was to perhaps help people who are more interested in a subculture such as underground hip hop in Mumbai, um, get a glimpse of what actually went on the ground before it reached a point where Bollywood came in and decided, okay, well, this is great enough to make a film and story about. Now, what was interesting was um, we met these guys on ground. Having been a music journalist and music photographer myself before, I was obviously quite clued in with a lot of the stories of these guys, their backgrounds, their trajectories, and possibly dreams for the future with a movie like Garibot coming in. Um, it was such an interesting process because while it's a 30-minute film, which I personally think offers viewers a lot of great deep insight into the story of Bombay hip hop, away from sort of the names that became big eventually in the mainstream. Was interesting to see the journey and how excited everyone was to tell their story to someone because they knew that, as the tagline of the movie went, "Apna time aayega." It was truly a sort of representation of that. I see there's a question about this, but we'll come to it at a later point about Kabul Tapata in specific. Um, the idea is, uh, largely to round this off so we can move on, was that having been involved in the music scene on the periphery or perhaps a little further in than the periphery, I kind of knew that this is going to blow up. Um, and there is no greater sign in India of something blowing up than Bollywood. And I guess it was a developing story, but something we also had access to. I think that's what helped us make this, and perhaps viewers enjoy this film when we ended up sort of releasing it right around when Gulliver was about to release. Yeah, we can move to the next slide, which is basically to tell you guys that no matter what, just keep watching stuff
Yeah.
from everywhere. I mean, there's 100 places you can watch films. There's it's. I was just thinking about it. I was talking to an editor the other day who is way younger than I am, and I was like, "You had Netflix when you were in college, so you have no complaints about not having access to anything." Because I think when I was in college, we still had hard drives, and we still had maybe broadband was just getting better. So I can't even imagine the trajectory that people are now going through with in terms of access. There's 100 places you can watch documentaries, films. Besides piracy, there's, I mean, YouTube is the greatest teacher. I truly believe that. Film festivals, which nowadays are obviously all online, much like this class that we're sort of conducting. There's so many places. Like Mami, to me, is one of the greatest sort of temples to watch film at. I feel like I did the experience a few I mean, the year before, and I felt alive again, having just gone out and being a nerd and being like, okay, I want to watch these films. There's obviously the usual Netflix, Amazon, Z5, I don't even know. There's like so many of the Apple TV, movie, there's everything. And the internet in general is just such a great place for you to be able to access films. Sometimes you got to pay a little money, but I think it often feels great once you've watched the film that, okay, yes, I did pay that $1 to this, which I think us as Indians are not too happy about in general. But make that practice happen, make the art form grow bigger, because it's only going to help aspiring people perhaps come into the industry or get into this profession in a better way.
Yeah, we didn't.
Yeah,
When I was growing up, I didn't have docu watching people around me. So my first point to figure out where do I find out what film to watch, because yes, a lot of them exist, but how do you figure them out? And an easy way, of course, is, as Naman said, Mami, great. I mean, that's where we watched One Child Nation. There's another festival called Open Frame, which is for PSBT, where you or something there. Something was also national award winning. Netflix obviously serial killer content, but also like do other. But if you're trying to figure out what is the big thing, maybe look out at review sections for some docus, especially in leading film sections of like Guardian or Scroll, whichever one fits your fancy, and also lists lists. For example, Sundance releases its winner list. That's a nice place to kind of pick and choose which films you'd want to watch. And then of course you'll figure out which kind of filmmakers you like based on that one film that they made, and then you go and charter their library is what you do. Yeah, we can move on to the next one. And
yeah,
that might be a good place to also answer one of the questions that we have about basically how do we find financiers and producers, because this is the section we're going to talk about how to know who you're pitching for, because before when you have a pitch, it needs to go somewhere, right? And who's the platform, which is the platform which will possibly host your content. And Naman, do you want to take the lead on that?
yeah. So, I mean, like I've said before already, there's now 150 places where you can just like watch stuff, and you'd be like, in fact, my younger brother told me about this, and he was like, "Do you know that when you watch Netflix documentaries, they all seem to have a certain over glamorized um, sense of music, sense of style, sense of drama, which when you now take a step back and look at, you're like, okay, this is a signature Netflix docu, such as all of the serial killer content that I guess everyone seems to watch nowadays, right? What is important when you're making the pitch is to know what, firstly, like we said, your idea is. Second is where the platform, what the platform for this film or piece of content is going to be. And it perhaps might be nice to start working backwards, knowing that. So you can have the same idea and present it to six different people and present it six different ways. So now if you want to put it up on YouTube, you don't need to present it to anyone. You just need to be convinced that yes, this is a good film, and just upload it on your channel and possibly uh, hope that it goes viral. That's one way. The other is, if you're pitching to Netflix, you should know how perhaps someone at Netflix will want to see your pitch, or if you're going to another platform, or if you're trying to pitch it to financiers abroad at like grants and festivals, right? It's kind of important to know that it's best when you're at this crossroads of your pitching process. It's always good to possibly reach out to people who have done this before. uh, I've been personally very shocked to know that the more actually you try to reach out to people, the nicer they are. It's that your own initial fear that you actually need to really get over, uh, because more people than not are willing to help out people who want to kind of begin a journey, than tell them to just get lost, right? Because I guess as a filmmaker who's received a grant once, you'd be like, I know what I went through, and you're more than willing to help someone else who's kind of beginning that journey at a certain point in time. What's also important to know is that there's so many different ways you can also present your content, right? It can be like vertical, like an Instagram story. It can be I mean, there's 100 different ways now. Right? It could be VR, it could be 360 video, it could just be a GoPro mounted to your head for 3 days and you edit it beautifully, and it's like, this is what my eyes see, and that could be your film. But it's important to know where it's eventually going to go, right? There's also digital, there's also TV, but I think we're going to touch upon TV so much because I don't think many of us even own TVs anymore. So we can move to the next bit, talking about pitch, which is just more for reading, because we've kind of rambled on about this. You keep moving to the next bit. This is basically a log line. Keep writing and rewriting and surface research. Before you go in to present the whole story, at least know your surface info. You can't be going into a meeting and saying to someone that, hey, I want to make a story about India's, I don't know, inequality, right? You could want, that's something that exists in general across our country, and it's a hard truth that exists. But what about that would you want to make a detailed film about? You can be talking about, okay, inequality in incomes across tier 2 cities in India, or you can be like inequality in how women were impacted during the lockdown and how they lost jobs. um, there has to be something more than just your basic that, okay, I want to make a film about this. I can be like, I want to make a film about football in India. um, okay, but what about football in India? Do you want to do a profile of how Indian football has depended heavily on Bachchan Bhutia over the years, or how infrastructural lack of support does not help football in India become, I guess, a sport as revered as cricket? There's many ways you can look at the same story, but it's important to know what that is, and that will only come from research. And for research, I guess I can't stress this enough. There is nothing better than the internet. Yeah, we can move on to the next bit.
Yeah, we have a question which is like, what are the steps before you undertake the actual shooting? So that's what we're going to go through in this entire procedure. Pitch becomes the first one, and this becomes the second one: how to know whether your story is good enough. The first point is obviously access, because it is. Even if you go and pitch something and it gets passed, but you don't actually have access to the person that you've promised the platform, that's where it's going to go kaput. So might not do that. You might want to pitch either something personal. For example, Not a Pretty Picture is a documentary where a documentary filmmaker was a rape survivor, went on to make a film with another actress. Now, another question we had was about what is a difference between a docudrama and a documentary. This is where the differentiation comes. You're only showing like facts as they are, with real people in real time. You're shooting with them real time. That is what usually becomes a documentary. And a docudrama is, let's say, when you're recreating a lot more of what we call features, like recreating in a feature style of what happened. So let's say a very bad example of this is all the Crime Patrol, Sadhan India shows that you might have seen. Those are docudramas, so that's a dramatization of a real event. Whereas a documentary might have either pitching someone's personal story, or pitching a person like Umar Khalid or Chandrasekhar Azad, or pitching a connection between people. So Naman did a piece on how drag queens in Thailand had created a community of their own. So he met a bunch of drag queens and, of course, weaved it together as a narrative. And similarly, the story of my circumcision was about Khatna, female genital circumcision, that happens in the Bhori community in mostly in Mumbai and Gujarat. And that, so you meet 2 3 characters who seem to have a same like a similar story, and through them you try to explore different aspects of the story. You don't want the same people saying the same thing. Kind of becomes redundant. So access becomes number one. Second becomes research. So before you're going to pitch to someone, especially, for example, Wire, Scroll, Quint, all of these places, Vice as well, they work with freelancers on a regular basis because that's what the model is becoming in news media itself. Similarly, if you're pitching to, let's say, for a grant, then the research part of it becomes really important. And Netflix is, of course, a longer game, so similar vibes for that as well. But in research stage, you probably want to be conscious of your own biases. You might want to take off the baggage that you might be carrying because of your own like your own history, your culture. And as when you're going in the research stage, basically go to the academics, look for papers that might have been written on the subject. Google Books is a way to search those. But basically, research stage means you tell people your characters and the places that your characters are going to be, but also what are the statistics and why the story stands out and why it's important. Um, Similarly, when you're doing your research, you will figure out the angle itself. And the angle is chosen because you want the story to kind of connect to the audience. You want more people to see your story. You want it to connect on a human level, right? And for that human level, you need to kind of weave through all the material that you're getting through the research and find that one fact that hits you. And when it hits you, it'll probably hit other people too. And that's how you find the story within your larger subject. So within the largest subject of Muslim identity, Naman weaved through and found Umar Khalid's story as a way to talk about what was happening in the CA protests. So that's where you have your character, you have your location, and you have what you're going to say in the story. Right, Naman?
All right. Should I
I'm going
move?
to, yeah, I wanted you, Naman, do you want to talk about equipment and visual
Yeah.
language?
Yeah.
Because apart from cameras, we shoot on mobiles as well, but it's important to
Yeah.
know cameras, lenses, archival.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, there's a bunch of ways we can take this. So, equipment is something that I think a lot of people tend to be scared or worried about. But that said, thanks to a certain film called Wake Up Sid, every kid in India now has a DSLR. So, what there's no reason for anyone to complain saying I don't have equipment. If you have a mobile phone that shoots fairly decent footage, you have some kind of equipment on your hands. Like I mentioned right at the start, one of the most important things in any kind of filmmaking is sound. So if that is not sorted, I guess you're losing this battle. But the most important, having said that, coming to talking about equipment, you can choose to make your film on the oldest mobile phone that exists to give it that sort of an edgy, cool look, or you can make it with the newest, biggest sensor megapixel camera to, so HD that you can even see the hair in my nose. So there's two spectrums to this. What's interesting is knowing whether you have access to that equipment. One, whether your story needs a certain kind of equipment, which will end up defining your visual language or vice versa. Um, Personally, and I know this because Esha and I worked together for 3 years, and I know Esha prefers way more beautiful looking frames and just
I'll
gorgeous
have to
looking
use
things in her
lenses.
films, compared to me, where I just want to go in on ground and be like, I don't care if I'm getting the perfect shot. It is important, but be like, right now, I want to film this, and this is a great line. I will think about the shot, but sometimes you just got to roll the camera. Talking of visual language, again, these are interdependent. What is important is now one of, I guess, a common example to use is there's two films I sort of keep going. There's one film that I keep going back to. It was produced by PSBT and DD. It was called I'm 20. If you guys haven't watched it, I'd urge you to really watch that film for what I guess edgy filmmaking in the 60s and 70s could have been. I'm 20 talks about the hopes and aspirations of a lot of 20-year-old Indians who were born on 15 August 1947 and what they wanted to go on and become and what they thought India could become. Now, this film is if you look at it from the perspective of 2020, it is a super stylized film for the time, even for now. It's just footage of people talking, but lots of B-roll of India, which makes it so engaging to watch. The other is a super stylized documentary series like Wild Wild Country. Not for once are you feeling that you're listening to someone tell a real story, right? The way they're framed, huge houses, they're positioned in the center, amazing lighting, all of that happening. But that holds really well because the B roll, which is like your second component of filmmaking, is so great because everything that was happening in Valor Country was perhaps well documented because of, I guess, Osho's needs to document everything that was going on in the ashram, right? Because there's so that kind of merges two things, right? It's your visual language, which is so beautiful, and you have these slow more shots of Man and Sheila walking, but intercut with frenzied DV cam, sort of beta cam footage of like the followers of their ashram going crazy dancing. Um, when you put that contrast, that's such a great visual language to kind of fall upon because you're like, people in today's day are reflecting upon something that happened. So that is important. I'm coming to the next point. So we just kind of run through this. What and
Mhm.
who to leave out? I'm just going to touch upon that. Is I'll give you an example just to illustrate this point. Um, Recently finished filming a documentary about gun culture. I'm not allowed to say more, but for that we interviewed two experts, and when the edit happened we were like, we don't need the second expert. What we did was we went in, we spoke to both of them about the same things and a few different subjects within the larger theme of our documentary, and on edit we realized we don't need this other person, so that person does not exist on the face of our edit. But more important than that is be there, right? So now by be there, I guess I'm going to let Esha have a final word, but what I would like to say about be there is it is so important for you to know what your story is, why you need to tell that story, and perhaps why you are the right person to tell it.
Yeah, and also I don't want to sound like your parent, but if you read the newspaper and you come across like a weird little story that's coming through, that becomes sometimes how you start off on a journey for a specific video. So it's great to just consume content here and there. Just helps you figure out what would be an interesting story, anything that interests you, but basically also because you possibly want it to match to your core audience, how to take that story and make it for your own core audience. And I think that answers one of the questions, which was about what's a good story. Okay, I'm going to go to the next part, which is the presentation part of the pitch. This is when you already have a pitch and you're possibly going to, let's say, a person like in DW or in Vice, and you're telling them that this is the story that I want to make. And the presentation part, basically, Naman is an ace at pitching. So I'm going to take this because this is probably the most critical point, even if you have story with you, but you either bore or not interest your possible financer kind of falls through there.
I think we can just run through to the end
Yeah.
of the presentation bit where I guess the participants can just read what we've got in that.
Yeah. It'll basically tell you that A, obviously, you're going to be pitching to an audience. So you have to have that as a part of it. So you need to know your TG. If it's for a younger audience, you're going to possibly shoot it a certain way. If it's a calmer story, you're possibly going to want to have a certain kind of B-roll attached to it. So when you're telling it to a certain like let's say you're pitching it to Vice, you'll need to tell them that in smaller words, this is my story, but this is what you're going to see in the film. And that's why it's very important, just like this presentation, to have your pitch kind of at a later stage full of pictures. Just kind of throw what you think it's going to look like at the end. Definitely needs to be short and not too wordy because I mean, it's just basic. The CB rule, that's what it is, one page. And apart from that, Naman, tell me how you evoke your feelings and all.
Yeah. Okay. So having had to pitch to a lot of different places. I guess it's very important to know, like Esha said, who your audience is or what your audience is. So it's important to know who you're pitching to. So if you think that you have a certain story which exists out there in the world for everyone to see, you need to be able to, like I said, fine tune your pitch and presentation and be like, is this person going to be interested in reading this one page? What do I have special with me in my pitch that will possibly make this person want to accept my pitch? So, for instance, I'm going to use an ongoing pitch that I have right now, actually, with Esha, where it's like we all have seen recently that there has been a exam announced for cow science in the country. Now, if everyone knows this news, everyone's seen it as memes on Instagram or as different forms on the internet, whether it's a news article or a video. Um, my idea was like, if I have to pitch this to Vice, what would be interesting would be to be like make it more experiential. So I was like, how about I take this exam and see what it is like and why this exam for cow science in the first place exists in this country. So that's customizing it. Another way now, for instance, if I were to look at something that is different now, if I have to pitch something about the farmer protests to a business channel, what would be interesting would be to see what is the cost of running a protest and then make it a more stat driven on ground business story where like thousands and thousands of farmers are protesting in India while the mainstream media is not covering it. But here's the business angle to it, and here's the cost of running a protest. Here's the cost to the economy that it is going to affect. So it's important to know how and what your story is going to be, and perhaps which will really help in sort of um, refining your presentation and pitch. What is important about the presentation, like Esha said, and sorry to sound like a broken radio, but it cannot be long. No one has time. I mean, we're scrolling past 15-second videos on Instagram. So imagine what a page looks like in contrast to that. So it's got to be really quick.
Yep.
Yeah.
So when someone's sending us a pitch, usually if all of the words that we have been throwing around, characters, narrative, locations, all are there, the next step we would expect from them, if it's approved, is for them to sort of tell us how much is going to cost us to make that film. And it could cost you a lot less. Let's say you're recording all your audios via your iPhone headphones through your iPhone's recording sound app, as well as shooting on your iPhone. Now, why I'm saying iPhone is because actually when you put a footage from Samsung or some other phone into an edit, frame rates drop, and doesn't really you can't really edit that outside of a phone. That's why the cheapest mode for a filmmaker right now, reliable, is an iPhone, and then you move on equipment wise, of course, to other cameras. Anand Padpadhan still shoots on his old smaller news camera, and we usually use different kind of like Sony A7Ss or higher end high bit DSLRs for actual professional filmmaking. And of course, films like Wild Wild Country are shot on huge feature like filmmaking cameras, but that's like a long way ahead. That kind of a budget is of course passed for shows which are for 6 hours and are about Osho's life. So basically, when your pitch gets passed and you move on to the next stage, budget and schedule becomes important because you need to tell the places such as, let's say, Wire, Scroll, DW, all of these places would expect to know when they can expect of either an end-to-end project, or if you're just the person who's shooting it or you're just the person who's editing it, then how many days it's going to take you. It's good to put timelines to your project, even though the frank truth is that documentary filmmaking sometimes can become a long process and you can get stuck in loops. There is a project that I started in 2018 that still hasn't seen fruition. There is a project, Naman, and I started in the lockdown in 2020. It's been a year. It's not going anywhere. So that can happen, but usually stick to a smaller timeline if it's something that is happening now. So a film on the farmers' protest would need to come out now. And a larger documentary about fascism in India would need to come out, maybe can come out a year later. Pre-production, we can move on to basically as a freelancer, Naman, what do you send forward to places? For me, it's a budget, production, and schedule. Schedule can just be a list of dates. We can move to the next slide.
Yeah, we can move to maybe
Then,
two or three
yeah,
of them. Yeah. Yeah.
yep,
Okay, we can save this. I mean, you can screen grab this if you want, if it helps you get a look of what perhaps
yeah,
a budget sheet can look like. Like I said, this one lists down 100 people, but it's just to give you a sense of a template. This can all be cut down to 6 people, like we often do,
even two.
sometimes even two. What's
Yeah,
important to know is that as a freelancer, if you're pitching it, you're still going to be pitching it for a certain cost, which is going to be the same whether you employ 10 people or 2 people. So I guess when you're a freelance director and producer, if you pitch for the same cost but only employ 2 people, that's more money for you, I guess. But also means lot more work. It's about taking that decision, right? We can move to the next 2 slides, I think. There's just another sample budget continuation of that.
yeah,
Okay.
because usually organizations have budgets in their head for allocation, but what makes or breaks it is the kind of talent and crew you're bringing on. So if you're bringing on a DOP, who possibly has worked for 10 years and shoots beautiful films and has a great reel, it'll cost you more, but also it'll cost the possibly if it's for a platform which likes good visuals, it would be important for them that you have someone like that on board. But if you're in the middle of a protest and you're shooting on a mobile phone, the budget would be different. And the idea is that if you're having travel involved, it would be a higher budgeted video, and vice versa. So all of that, the total budget number kind of becomes also an important aspect in whether it gets approved or not. Just basically, you'll figure richer places have more money to spare, poorer organizations have less money to spare. It's
Yeah, and
you
just
pitch
another thing.
accordingly.
Yeah, just another thing I wanted to add in here. This is obviously for documentaries, which kind of, because one of the questions kind of talks about how do you differentiate a documentary from a news report? Well, a news report is just a report, like the word suggests, of what is happening and possibly not twisting the reality and presenting that. Well, news, the idea traditionally of news is to be not biased, right? So say the truth, tell your viewers exactly what's happening, whereas a documentary can take a certain story narrative, which kind of brings me to the research and recce. It's all so. For instance, when you are going in with a certain plan of knowing what your story is going to be, research and recce, so to say, is, I guess, just preempting everything that you need to do, knowing where you're going to be filming, knowing it like the back of your hand, so on and so forth. And it's so important. I can't stress enough, because it'll come to our next slide, which talks about jugaad, right? Sometimes you go in, you know, this is exactly what my frame is going to look like. This is exactly what the story is going to be like. This is exactly how I want to shoot it. But you go there and you're like, no, I can't. These are just 2 sample frames from experiences with jugaad that we've had to pull in our projects. The one on the left is a small series. I don't think you can call it a documentary, but it's just an example of jugaad. It's a series we run on Vice called Trash Talk, where we just get people to trash on everyday grievances, standing next to a trash can, literally meaning trash talk. We were supposed to actually talk about some completely different subject, but for some reason it didn't work out. So we ended up at the Ghat in Banaras, and we were like, hey, Swachh Bharat campaign is like going gung ho. Let's maybe talk to people who are at the Ghat next to trash cans, talk about Ganga pollution. And it kind of really worked out well. I'm going to let Esha talk about the picture on the right before we kind of power through to the next
Yeah.
bit.
this is part of like a series we were making on like sex positive movements across India. And 3 a.m. On the day before the shoot, basically the shoot was supposed to be at 7 a.m. The participant called and said the photo studio I had booked is not coming through. The model I had booked is not coming through, and you can't shoot in my house because my mother will come to know that I shoot porn, like boudoir photography. So that can't happen. And suddenly, basically at 3 a.m., we needed a plan B, and that becomes important. Becomes important every aspect of filmmaking. It's around and have plan B. So you, if let's say if you're doing a subject like sex, you know that at some point someone's going to back out, and that's why you keep a plan B. And we quickly made up another plan that we'll just shoot our host as a boudoir photography like participant and do it in the hotel room. So this is my hotel room, so we'll do it in the room that we're staying in. And it was all planned out in like possibly 30 minutes, quick decisions on ground. But the ability to have plan B also means that when you're in your pre-production stage, you preempt all the disasters that are going to come your way. And there are going to be so many disasters that you're actually going to forget how many disasters you've been through. But also all your disasters cost you money as well. So when you're preparing a budget, keep like a little extra stash money on the side, because you're possibly going to run into little hurdles. And yeah, someone asked like how viable is freelancing financially as earning for self. I'll let Naman take that because he's a freelancer.
Well, it's good and bad. Some months you can hit a jackpot 3 times in a row, and some months you can be uh, just picking your hair out. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a seesaw.
yeah.
I guess you can tell that
I
from my
mean,
tone.
I'm also a freelancer, but I have made like a partnership with someone for like a year or so. Like it's on a retainer basis, because that's another way freelancers work. And while that means less money, it just means stability. So yeah, either way you'll figure. There's a lot more money in freelancing than it is to be a part of a company, but there's a lot more instability as well. So whichever way, you're fine if
It
you want to
also
back
means a
up.
lot more hustling
A lot more
and
hustling and following through
constantly.
on payments.
Yeah, and writing to accounts department saying, "Give me the money you owe me.
Yeah,
Please do
and
me
it's
a
been
favor."
45 days. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
we can move to
You
the
need to
next
be good
bit.
with your finances. But also, do you need a script for your documentary? Yes, you kind of need a script for your documentary, and we'll come to that in this stage, which is the
Yeah.
shoot stage. Basically, before you go into a documentary, we sort of write out what, based on the previous research, and we've already talked to all the people that we're already meeting on ground. So we kind of write out a structure, what preempting what they might say and how it might fall through into a narrative. And then when things go wrong, we kind of shift things around. Cool.
Yeah. Okay. So something I want to talk about shooting and post production is, I'd say, knowing your story is, and your research and everything is 25% of the battle. Shoot is another 25% of the battle. Like I said, there's many ways to go about it. One is, okay, this is the story I want to tell. That's scripted, sort of nonfiction documentary. It's still a documentary, but it's still scripted. And then there are a few more, which is like lived experiences or documentaries that are sort of made like in retrospect. So one of my favorite examples for that is, say, something like An Insignificant Man, which is a documentary made by two film students who were convinced about the workings of the Aam Aadmi Party and decided to join them and started documenting the growth of Aam Aadmi Party, and this, right until the point of the swearing in of Arvind Kejriwal for the first time as Delhi's chief minister. Very fascinating, edited in retrospect to this being a people's movement for change. But what was great about that film was two people, hundreds of students with cameras all over, um, ridiculous access to closed door meetings of a political party, and eventually, personally, what I think, edited like a great thriller. So you never feel like it's a political film, but it's also thrilling. You're at the edge of your seat. You're also hopeful while watching it. You're also frustrated while watching it. That's one way of shooting it, and the other, like you already said, is like, say, something like a Tiger King, where you know the story has existed, and there's all this archival footage and news reports about it, and then you go and revisit these people and talk about, I guess, their relationships with each other. I guess, if you guys want, we'll share a bunch of links of some of our films, which some are literally you're in the middle of it, um, and some which are, like I just said, you've got to know your story and then build a script around it. I think we can move to. There's a bunch of points in the next couple of slides. We can just move to the last one, so we can just see all of them in one go.
Yep.
Yeah.
Basically, I mean, the points are simple. One of the main things that we do, which we were talking about, like, does documentary have a script, is because you want to know how your edit is going to look like at the end. So you want to know that maybe I'm starting with like a compilation of bites of people talking about Arvind Kejriwal, or maybe I want to just be in his drawing room and it's playing out as a normal day-to-day like tea drinking session scene. You need to figure out on your edit what you want, so that you go and shoot those parts. And of course, you'll get the extras and you'll find out places to put them. But also, the important part to know your story like the back of the hand is actually very helpful when it comes to shooting symbolism around you. So let's say you're shooting a movement, like an Ambedkarite movement. You need to know that blue is the color of the Ambedkarite movement. You need to know all the signs of Buddhism which have seeped in. You need to also know the ties between communism and Ambedkarite movement, so that you can pick up these little things when you're shooting them. Because a lot of your story then becomes told through the b-roll that you layer on top. So your people are talking, and then we're seeing their drawing room around, and that kind of builds an atmosphere of all the little things that affect them in their real life. And that kind of makes it different from a news report as well, because there is a certain level of filmmaking that comes in, whereas a news report is sort of slapdash, let's get it out in 3 hours sort of a work. And definitely, when you're on shoot, you yeah, this we've done many times, where you tend to forget your basics. So it's always good to go through like a mental checklist. I have shot a certain part of an entire documentary while having the mic plugged in to the headphone jack, and hence had to walk out to use that part. And I know many other people who have done this on like their first year of work and all. In a DSLR, basically the jacks are next to each other. Terrible. And yeah, Naman, do you want to take through the rest?
Yeah. So I think we're a little bit short on time, so we want to keep trying to
Run
move
through.
ahead. But one
Yeah.
thing that's important is B-roll. Now, B-roll, for those who I guess are new to these terminologies, is basically your second component of filmmaking, which is, if someone is telling the story, what do you need to show along with it? Scene establishers, context to what they're talking about. Maybe it could be a news clip about what they're talking about. It could just be cutaways of their hands or their house. All of that stuff is B-roll. My joke with editors generally is, if I give you less B-roll, you're going to complain. If I give you more B-roll, you're going to complain. Just give them more, because they're always going to complain saying there's not
Yeah.
enough B-roll. Variety, um, and knowing what is important to the story. So, for instance, if you have Sachin Tendulkar talking about his perfect straight drive, you can't be showing Saurav Ganguly doing a cover drive, basically. So the B-roll is, you need archival clips of Sachin playing that straight drive. Yeah. I think we can make the next two
Yeah.
or three slides, we can just like skim through, because they're just sample scripts on how we do, I mean, kind of traditionally do them
So we
within
can
a
go next.
structural thing like Vice. But there's no hard and fast rule. That said, YouTube, again, is your greatest teacher on how to structuring a script and format. So we can just skim through the next two, three slides if you like.
Yeah. Basic rule we follow is put the action right up top, and basically your most compelling piece of the film, which sort of kind of ties into what overarchingly your story might be, needs to be put up top. And then the rest needs to follow through a general narrative where you kind of tell us the context of what is happening, because you have to assume that a lot more people might not know what's happening or about the subject, and then kind of move forward to parts you find interesting. So we can scan through the next pages to just give you a look of what it looks like. And while you're seeing them, right at the end, we'll show you another slide of how we make a Bible at the end. Dhwani, we can go next.
Maybe start with a few questions if you want, and then we'll get
Yes.
back to this.
What trends do you see in the world of documentary filmmaking moving forward? A lot more intimate stories, a lot many stories which are where the filmmaker becomes a part of the scene itself, because the facade of the camera being an invisible entity, fly on the wall, is we are slowly moving past that. And also, docus are ever evolving. There are the larger trends that we are seeing right now is, of course, the stories being human stays the same, but we're seeing a lot more of docus where you have access that we've not had before. Places where you haven't been before, because the common places can now be seen through the fact that a lot more people have access to Instagram Live and technology. What you're seeing a lot on your social media, you'd probably want to go a little bit away from it, because that kind of becomes something that has been seen a lot around. Okay, for this as well, Dhwani, can you come on slide 43, please? Meanwhile, what are some of the best documentary filmmaking institutes or programs in the country? For this, okay, so documentary filmmaking is taught as a part of television programming in AJK MCRC, also as part of the journalism course, as well as a part of the mass comm course. It's also taught in IIMC and also in ACJ. So all of these places are great places to learn. Xavier's as well. So depending on how much money you have and which exam you crack, those are the ones you go for. And okay.
Sorry, I seem to have missed that question. But if it's
No,
about colleges, I can say
yeah.
don't go to college.
Yeah, that's also another question someone asked, like, do you need to go to college? No, not really. A lot of the people that we work with actually haven't been to a college, but also haven't been to a filmmaking college for sure. I did for my master's. The only thing that it gave me was perhaps a network, but I could have gotten that network through work as well.
Yeah, YouTube, guys, and
YouTube, yeah.
nofilmschool.com.
Yeah. Quickly on this one, nothing. Basically, when you're finally coming up with, basically, you're going to either through a big budget shoot, which is going to take you through a longer time, or a series, like series. You're planning to pitch someone 3 episodes of something. Then you need to give them a guide. The first picture shows how the B-roll is going to be. So it's going to be a lot of gimbal shots. The second one is interview frames, and the mixed media style is when you're working with something of a project where a lot of archival is being used. Of course, the easy way is to go through the Ken Burns motion of slowly moving in and out of pictures, but sometimes you want to be creative with it, so you kind of use tabletop imagery. All of this basically is a guide that goes to the DOP, goes to the graphics team, to the producers, to the people on ground. And also, if you already know who's possibly editing your film, you'll probably want them to be on board now, because frankly, editors have the best references and they'll tell you how they want to make the film. Cool. Next one, please. And basically, the first tenant is don't panic, because all shit's always going to be hitting the fan. Things are mostly always going wrong. And then we've come up with the Fire Festival. For this one truck art one, the subject kind of went missing basically 2 hours before the shoot. And we all scampered around. Turns out he just was working, so he couldn't pick up our call. So we just landed up at the site and he was there. So just don't panic. Next one being post-production. That's the important part. Naman?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to focus. Something I used to run away from, but I've come to love. Post-production is perhaps one of the most important parts of filmmaking. It's literally where your film is made. You can have all the footage in the world, so will 100 other people who have iPhones there and were possibly present at an iconic moment. Let's just take the example of what happened at the US Capitol like 2 days ago. I'm personally, however terrible it sounds to say this, I'm looking forward to seeing what great cinema is going to come out of that moment, because you bet there will be a lot of it. Besides of, there's that whole saying that we have now, like the revolution will not be televised, but it is definitely going to be live streamed. So perhaps one of the things that we can focus on with post production is that it is so important to know what your story is. Again, something we touched upon earlier as well multiple times is you can keep going on filming for years and not be satisfied. Say, for instance, you have a story about someone who's on death row 20 years from now, but you decide to go interview him every day for 1 year on his for 20 years on his birthday. Then you feel like, hey, maybe the laws about death row inmates have changed, but I want this to become a bigger film, not just about this character. So post production is where you really need to know that this is my story. One of my favorite examples to use here is filmmaker Asif Kapadia, whose all his films, if you look at it, um, are great documentaries, never made by interviewing people or showing them being interviewed face to face. They are always archival footage. They are always just audio interviews, and they're always a definitive period of a celebrity's sort of public life, right? So if you look at this documentary he did on Amy Winehouse, it is literally about the story of her mental health being impacted based on the media's reporting on her. Or if you look at his new film, which is about Maradona, which I highly recommend everyone watches, it doesn't talk about Maradona's life as a footballer. It talks about Maradona's life just in Italy when he played for Napoli. Um, he's also creatively supervised the film about Britpop legends Oasis, which literally talks about the formation of the band Oasis and them playing their first big gig in England to 100,000 people. So knowing what your story and what you're trying to tell through your story is very important when you go into post production. It often changes when you're at the stage. There's a lot of wordiness in this slide right now. If you have any questions, please post them. We can try and address those specifically. But it's so important to know these different levels that are important in post production. What we'll also try and do is focus on some post production related questions when we come to that bit. But I've just finished a long documentary edit for 60 minutes right now, and everyone asked me, how do you feel about it? I feel like 70% is the film I wanted to be, but 30% is not there. Uh, which comes to the last point on this, which is like you're never going to be happy with
Yeah.
your edit, which is the curse of being, I guess, some sort of a creative person, which is self doubt is our sort of greatest friend, right?
Yeah. Pretty much like your what I was telling Naman earlier was your baby might be ugly and you kind of have to deal with it, and it's fine. And this is not the only film you'll ever make, so you'll figure. And also all of your life experiences in the past. As a filmmaker as well, and you'll see that in the filmography of different filmmakers that you see, kind of starts educating your way of talking about things, and your career. It's a fodder for your career as a filmmaker. Yep. When all of this is done, if you are an independent filmmaker who's possibly doing it for YouTube, you can just upload it on YouTube and send it forward. If you're doing it for a news organization or a media organization, they'll publish it on their YouTube. But you would have gone through all of their cut stages along with them. And yeah, sit and relax. Some of them might do well, and some of our videos also have tanked majorly. One of my dearest pieces has only gotten 30,000 views. It kills me, but it has happened. So you deal with it. We can move to questions now, I think.
Yeah. I think before we take a couple of them, just yeah, it's also important to know if you're an independent filmmaker, you have control of it. If once a producer comes in, producer gets control of it. If there's a creative producer, they get more control of it. If it's a client or a news organization or an editor, so to say, in the video sense of it, they get more control of it because you have to match their editorial like standing
Yeah.
and perspectives. It is important to know that it is never going to be as you envisioned it. Having said that, it can be close to it, but it's just better to give you the truth than like gloss over this and make it appear all flowery.
Yep.
Yeah, we can move to the next
Also,
slide.
by the
There's a
way,
couple of
making film. a lot of brands kind of started have commissioning docu-films because it's they want to be more real as well. When you're making that, possibly you have the least amount of control in the entire hierarchy of docu-filmmaking control. So you kind of have to deal with when you want to push for your things as a creative, and when you kind of have to step back because that's what it's going to be.
Yeah. We're going to
How to
skip the
pre-prod for sound design and music? Swapnil asks.
sorry, just one sec. Do you think can move to questions? Yeah, I don't think
Yeah, we pretty
we've
much
got a
covered
couple
it
of
all.
more slides.
Because
We'll just,
the published part I kind of spoke about, like,
yeah.
yeah, YouTube you can just put on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess we're going to try and take in some questions, mostly, I guess, related to pre-production, post-production. We've got a lot of them to go through. Okay, so yeah, we'll just take the one about how to pre-prod for sound and design and music. So sound often comes in at a much later stage. It's literally after your edit, and which is like your offline edit is sort of locked, and you kind of know this sort of, if you've got a guide sort of sound reference that you want to be placed in certain places, and then if you have the budget, if you want it to be scored in a certain way, there's obviously many sort of resources that filmmakers can use to sort of work with this. Firstly, musician friends, good to have them always, who are going to give you music for cheap. Sound banks, there's 100 of them that exist, where you can pay a nominal fee and use music and license it out. Use sound designers when you can, because they really elevate your project, in terms of whether it's adding silences or adding tension or adding sort of ambient sound. And in terms of music, it's so important to know. I mean, if you're talking about something really serious and you're going to use like some Looney Tune music, you're obviously not going to have the same impact that you're going to have when you use like maybe a drony synth like playing in the background while something really serious is being spoken about. Some of the, I mean, there's so many great examples which are just available to watch right now on Netflix. That, I mean, the lesser we say about it, the better, because it's easier if you just watch some of that stuff. But in terms of pre-prod, it's always good to budget for this stuff. Invariably, for some reason, in filmmaking larger sort of this universe that we exist in, it often is ignored, music and sound design, but it's literally one of the most important parts of that makes your film or breaks it. So you want to take some other film?
Yep. I was
Sorry.
question for so I'll run through the questions as well because we're running out of time. What is the color correction tool used in documentary filmmaking? Hi Naman, do you want to answer that? Or we
Yeah. Okay.
actually
So
have a color. Yeah.
yeah, this can depend on who your coloring artist is. That,
Yeah.
I mean,
They
that's too
use it
technical. This is too technical. I mean, you
at
can use
this stage.
After
Yeah.
Effects, you can use Resolve, you can use all sorts of softwares that exist out there. But the idea is it's important for you to know what your color grading you want it to look like, and then hire the right person,
Yeah.
because they really know what they're doing. Mm,
Yeah, but if you can't hire the right person because you don't have budgets, basically there are a hell lot of LUTs and you kind of slap them on. And all of them kind of colors have a theory behind them. So you might want to read up on color theory, why a certain frame you might want to keep yellow and some blue. All of them have reasons and emotions that they evoke. And effective steps for a quality script for a documentary and documentary drama. How different will the scripting be for both formats? They weren't at the big stage itself because a documentary drama would have a higher budget because you'll be shooting fiction, and you'll also have to figure out which parts go as docu drama and which parts are the fiction parts and which parts are the real life on ground short parts. And docudramas are much more planned in advance than documentary filmmaking is. So you go in with the script and you go in with the visual layer, because whenever a fiction is made from scratch, right, and docu is kind of made backwards. This one being more fiction, you kind of have to plan ahead. Could you please elaborate on logline guidelines, like what does it sound, contain, etc.? Naman, I think we
Okay.
touched upon this. Mm.
Yeah. So again, like I said, you should be able to tell your story in one sentence, write it 100 times over in different permutations, combinations, if it sounds right to you, and say it out to your friends. Get random people to hear you, and if it sounds interesting to 50 people, I guess it's pretty interesting. There's no strict guidelines. When you're applying for grants to different places, they'll tell you it should be these many words, it should be one sentence, it should be one line. Now, one line can also be two sentences. So it's about how you structure it out. But having written way too many of these, I'd say the best advice is go with your instinct, write it out in a few lines, then keep cutting it back and come to that one perfect line. Don't make it too long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The next
I'm
question
going to
was
take,
sorry, go on.
yeah.
Do it.
I need to take this one, which is coming to I wanted to know how to get into the peer circle from where one can learn and absorb. Yeah, I don't know, because I always felt this about the larger documentary and photography community in India, that it is a bit of a circle jerk sometimes. But having said that, we both are some kind of outsiders in some weird way, because Esha came from hardcore journalism and I came from like music and art and that sort of um, background. And I guess because there is no clear definition of what documentary filmmaking can be today, it's so easy to, I guess, learn about this from anywhere. So I guess if you want to, I guess, avoid cliques is what I'd say to your question, because peers is just a polite way of saying cliques, I think.
Yeah.
And
Also, when
basically
you start
seeking
going to
for,
all these film festivals, you start meeting other peers, and you'll, yeah, that's possibly where you'll see them.
yeah. Maybe we can take one more, because I know we've got to wrap after that. And we have
Yep.
Asal's camera on, which means
Hi to
we
Udit
have.
Najawan. He works with Vice.
Hi to Udit. Udit, you can message me and I'll answer
Yeah.
this.
We'll, yeah.
Um,
What is the rise of digital space and technology, and how has documentary filmmaking been affected? Quickly, Naman and I both have worked on 360 videos. Always when there's a new trend around, we run to try it out, and it's really nice in the beginning. But you always kind of fall back into traditional filmmaking in the sense that it always becomes about people, or like stories of people. So it's a new toy phenomena
yeah.
for me
Having
at
said
least.
yeah,
Yeah,
having said that, I had a pretty interesting experience with VR in general. So it's important to know where it's going to be presented, right? So I
yeah.
watched a really interesting film that it was one of the first. I think it was the first like VR film that the New York Times did, which was with a street artist called JR, and the idea was that he was painting, doing a paste on in New York about the common New Yorker walking, and it was a VR film. It was pretty simple. The artwork was great. It was a huge scale, 100 feet, paced up on the footpath in a busy street of New York. But because it was a VR film, the idea was that they went up with the artist in a chopper and got the experience of him looking down at the artwork, but this was presented as a VR film. So you, as a viewer with your VR headset, could experience watching down on that
Yeah.
artwork at the same that JR, the artist, was doing. So yeah, that's one of the ways. There's so many questions. Maybe we can perhaps I don't know. Asad, I
DM
can
us, I
only.
guess.
Yeah, you can
Yeah.
message us on Instagram. I guess we're
Guys,
pretty
if you'll want, we
responsive.
can capture the questions and then you can answer them and we can send them across
Yeah,
if that works for you.
that
Yeah.
sounds good. Yeah.
But thank you, Naman and Isha, for sharing such interesting insights and perspectives. And we were talking earlier, we had scheduled this masterclass in September, and I'm so glad we could originally we could kind of make this happen. And definitely, Naman, you can run, but you can never hide from Avid. So where, judging by the number of participants and the number of questions, I think this is probably the most questions we have received in a 1.5 hour session. We definitely need a 2.0. So you'll hear from me very soon. Jokes aside, thank you to our participants for logging in, and also these wonderful questions. I mean, it really makes us, feel that what we're doing is resonating, and it's actually it's great to have even your questions as feedback. Our next session is on the changing face of the image. It's kind of an evolution, and the evolution of film and photography industries, which is going to happen on next Thursday, the 14th at 6 p.m. Do check it out. Also, we've added some panelists to that session, so it's going to be quite interesting. And to find out more, just follow us at Avid Learning. Go onto our website, and until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and remember that learning never stops. Thank you so much, Naman and Esha, again. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thanks,
you so much.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye.